In the previous module, I discussed with you the epistemological considerations of qualitative research, its orientation, thrust and focus. In this module, I shall try to give you some insight into the research paradigms of qualitative research. There are a number of paradigms of qualitative research. These are naturalism, ethnomethodology, grounded theory, case studies and extended case method, institutional ethnography, participatory action research, etc. Of course, this does not exhaust the variations on the method. However, it should give you a broad appreciation of the possibilities. It will not be possible for us to discuss all of them. We will discuss only a few. Let us first take a look at naturalism. Naturalism is an old tradition. The earliest field researchers operated on the positivist assumption that social reality was out there, outside, and it had to be observed naturally and reported by the researcher as it really is. This tradition started in the 1930s and 40s at the University of Chicago's sociology department. Its faculty and students fanned out across the city to observe and understand local neighborhoods and communities. The researchers of that era and their research approach are now often referred to as the Chicago School. And the method that emerged out of this paradigm called naturalism is ethnography. An ethnography is a study that focuses on detailed and accurate description rather than explanation and causation. In this method, researcher becomes the part of the world of subjects. He immerses himself in the social setting for a sufficiently long period of time. The researcher keeps observing, asking questions, and also keeps listening to what subjects talk among themselves as well as with him. In the process, he tries to capture various aspects like the perception, thinking, values, evaluation, reactions, practices, appreciations, customs, likes, dislikes, norms, and all other aspects of how life is lived and experienced by the subjects, in the light of research question, of course. One of the earliest and best known studies that illustrates this research is done by William Whitefoot, Ethnography of Cornerville. Cornerville was an Italian-American neighborhood, and it is detailed in his book Street Corner Society. Like other naturalists, White believed that in order to learn fully about social life on the streets, he needed to become more of an insider. He therefore made a contact with a person who he named Doc for reporting purposes. Doc was his key informant. This fellow was one of the street gang leaders. Through the help of Doc, the researcher entered his world. In ethnography, this is one major step, that you seamlessly enter the world of your subjects without raising any doubt about your being an outsider, an observer or researcher. Otherwise, true unguarded behavior will never come out in front of you, and you will never get to participate in the activities of the people. Coming back to White's ethnography or ethnographic study of Cornerville, this study offered something that surveys could not provide: a richly detailed picture of the life among the Italian immigrants of Cornerville. An important feature of White's study is that he reported the reality of the people of Cornerville on their terms. The naturalist approach is based on telling their stories the way they really are, not the way the ethnographer understands them. The narratives collected by White are taken at face value as the social truth of the Cornerville residents. I shall like to talk about another study also here by David Snow and Leon Anderson. This study was conducted as an exploratory field research into the lives of homeless people in the USA. Location of the study was Austin, Texas. Their main task was to understand how homeless people construct and create their identity, because the homeless know that the society attaches certain stigma and looks upon them disparagingly. The researchers also wanted to know how they negotiate, describe, and rationalize their identity. These researchers, Snow and Anderson, believed that to achieve this goal, the collection of data had to arise naturally. Like White in the street corner society, they found some key informants with whom they followed in their everyday journeys, such as at their day labor pickup sites or under bridges. Researchers would memorize the conversations they participated in or the talks that homeless people had among themselves. At the end of the day, the two researchers debriefed themselves and wrote detailed field notes about all the talks they encountered. They also taped in-depth interviews with their key informants. Snow and Anderson reported hanging out with the homeless people over a period of 12 months for a total of something like 405 hours in 24 different settings. Out of these rich data, they identified 3 related patterns in homeless people's conversations regarding their identity. First, the homeless showed an attempt to distance themselves from other homeless people as well as from the low status job that they currently had. Interestingly, they also distanced themselves from the Salvation Army on which they actually depended for their livelihood and food also so many times. Secondly, they embraced their street life identity, their group membership, or a certain belief about why they are homeless. Third, they told fictive stories that always contrasted with their everyday life. For example, they would often say that they were making much more money than they really were, or even that they were going to be rich. While ethnographers seek to discover and understand the patterns of living among those they are studying, the method has a limitation, which Michel Denier calls the ethnographic fallacy. This refers to an overgeneralization and oversimplification of the patterns observed. Despite the existence of patterns within groups, there is also diversity, and we also need to be careful of broad assertions that we tend to make in these studies. While we are studying only a group of persons, question remains, how much can we say that it would be applicable to other groups also? So this question will always remain. Now let us look at ethnomethodology as a research paradigm. It is a unique approach to qualitative field research. It has its roots in the philosophical tradition of phenomenology, and this is why ethnomethodologists are skeptical about the way people report their experience or reality. Phenomenology was introduced by Alfred Schutz. He argued that reality was socially constructed rather than being out there for us to observe. Social reality is not something outside of people. Rather, it is within the consciousness. People describe their world not as it is, but as they make sense of it. That is, people don't describe like you describe an object like car or a toy, but they uniquely assign meaning to their world and describe it in terms of the sense they make out of it. Thus, phenomenologists would argue that homeless in the study of Snow and Anderson I just talked about were describing their life and identity as it made sense to them. Their reports, however, would not tell us how and why it made sense to them. For this reason, researchers cannot rely on the subject's stories to depict social realities accurately, whereas traditional ethnographers believe in immersing themselves in a particular culture and reporting their informants' stories as if they represented reality. Phenomenologists see a need to make sense out of the informant's perception of the world. Following in this tradition, some field researchers have felt the need to devise techniques that reveal how people make sense of their everyday world. The sociologist Harold Garfinkel suggested people are continuing to create social structure through their actions and interactions. That is, they create their realities by creating a social structure in their interactions. We know social structure consists of norms, values, and control agents. So people in their interactions and actions create the social structure comprising specific norms and values. Just take a pause and reflect on any of your actions or interaction with anyone, whether a friend or a parent or child or boss. You will notice each interaction has its own specific social structure with its own norms and its own values. And interestingly, this structure keeps evolving or changing, transforming itself in the light of the experience. As an example, let's say you and your research supervisor meet to discuss your term paper. Even though there are myriad expectations about how you both should act, your conversation will offer somewhat from any of those that have occurred before, and how you act each time will somehow modify your expectations in the future. That is, discussing your term paper will impact the interactions each of you have with the other professors and students in the future. In this view, the reality is thus tentative, ever evolving and ever changing. Garfinkel suggests that people are continuously trying to make sense of the life they experience. In a sense, he suggests that everyone is acting like a social scientist, hence the term ethnomethodology or methodology of the people. Issue now is, how would you go about learning about people's expectations and how they make sense out of their world? What technique or method should be adopted to capture this? One technique ethnomethodologists use is to break the rules, to violate people's expectations. If you violate people's expectations, their true expectation from the interaction would come out automatically. We always have some expectation from each interaction. For example, if you say hello to someone, whether the person is known or unknown, there is an unwritten rule of civility that we should respond pleasantly by saying back hello or how are you or wave or at least nod. This is a rule. Harold Garfinkel suggested that if researchers bake such rules, then people's taken for granted expectations would become apparent and we can capture it. This is the technique that Garfinkel called ethnomethodology. For instance, once in one of the studies, Garfinkel asked his students to do a conversation clarification experiment. The goal was to uncover elements of conversations that are normally taken for granted. The students were told in this study to engage in an ordinary conversation with an acquaintance or a friend and to ask for a clarification about any of this person's statements. Let me describe one case here. The subject said to the researcher very pleasantly, "How are you?" The researcher, breaking the rule, replied, "How I am in regard to what? My health? My finances? My schoolwork, my peace of mind, or my what? In his notes, the researcher wrote that the subject was red in the face on this reaction and suddenly out of control and replied, "Look, I was just trying to be polite. Frankly, I don't give a damn how you are." Now, look at this. By setting aside or bracketing their expectations from these everyday conversations, the experimenters made visible the subtleties of mundane interactions. For example, although "how are you" has many possible meanings, none of us has any trouble knowing what it means in casual interactions, as the unsuspecting subject revealed in this final comment. The entire approach of ethnomethodologists emanates from the belief that there is a need to find ways to observe social reality. Garfinkel's method, or breaking the rule of expectation in any interaction, was one such method. Let me emphasize here and underline that at the center of this approach lies ethnomethodologists' belief that researchers who use naturalistic analysis lose the ability to analyze the common sense world and its culture if they use analytical tools and insights that are themselves part of the world or culture being studied. Let us now discuss another paradigm, grounded theory. It is one of the most popular paradigm of qualitative research. Grounded theory was developed by Barney Glasser and Anselm Strauss. These scholars brought together two main traditions of research, positivism and interactionism. Essentially, grounded theory is the attempt to derive theories from an analysis of the patterns, themes, and common categories discovered in the observational data. Grounded theory can be described as an approach that attempts to combine a naturalistic approach with a positivist concern for a systematic set of procedures in doing qualitative research. If you wish to master this method, there is a book by Juliet Corbin and Anselm Strauss titled Basics of Qualitative Research. You can use that. Major tools of grounded theory are theoretical sampling, coding, theoretical saturation, and constant comparison. As regards theoretical sampling, according to Glasser and Strauss, theoretical sampling is the process of data collection for generating theory in which the analyst jointly collects codes and analyzes his data and decides what data to collect next and where to find them in order to develop his theory as it emerges. The process of data collection is controlled by the emerging theory. A crucial characteristic of theoretical sampling is that it is an ongoing process of data collection, continuous process of data collection, rather than a distinct or single stage as it is done in quantitative research. Second tool of grounded theory is coding. Coding, in fact, is the key process in grounded theory. Coding involves breaking the data down into component parts, which are given names. It begins soon after the collection of initial data. Coding describes the chunks of data in transcripts of interviews and notes. It is through these codes that categories and concepts are evolved and theories arrived at. Coding is not merely a technical preparatory work for higher level thinking about the study. It should be very clearly stated that coding is deep reflection about and thus deep analysis and interpretation of the data's meanings. There are a large number of ways in which coding can be done. Miles and Duberman and Saldana, in their book titled Qualitative Data Analysis, a source book, have listed 25 methods or types of coding. Third tool is theoretical saturation. The key idea is that you carry on sampling theoretically until a category has been saturated with data, behavioral data. This basically means once a concept or category has been developed, you may continue the process of collecting data to determine the nature and operation of that particular category or concept, but then you must reach a point where new data are no longer illuminating that particular concept. New data will not add anything. Then this process of ongoing data collection can be stopped as we have reached the point of theoretical saturation. Finally, let us look at the tool called constant comparison. It refers to a process of maintaining a close connection between data and conceptualization, so that the correspondence between concepts and categories with their indicators is not lost. More specifically, attention to the procedure of constant comparison enjoins the researcher constantly to compare phenomena being coded under a certain category, so that a theoretical elaboration of that category can begin to emerge. Within the limitation of time availability, we could discuss only 3 paradigms, dear friends, but I am sure you would have got fairly good insight into the orientation of qualitative research for gaining further understanding of paradigms like case studies, the extended case method, institutional ethnography, participatory action research, etc., which I mentioned earlier. You may consult Earl Baby's book, Practice of Social Research. Thank you very much. I do sincerely hope that the lecture would be of some use to you in understanding the process of qualitative research. Thank you again.